Steelers, I was on board with this idea that one of the problems there, and I think I had expressed it differently, but one of the problems with the Steelers that I was starting to have more and more was I called it they were stale. They felt like a team that they were stale. They were going internal, it seemed, or they were just doing little promotions instead of new hires, right? The general lack of ideas that seemed fresh, innovative, out of the box. I wouldn't even say risky, just bold. There weren't many bold strokes being painted by the Steelers' brush. Sean Surrett doesn't work out as offensive line coach. Let's promote Adrian Clem. Adrian Clem wants to leave. Let's slide Chris Morgan in there. He does a better job, but he doesn't want to stay. Terrell Austin comes in after Keith Butler kind of hangs around, helps put together the defense, doesn't, by his own admission, call it. He steps away and retires. Terrell Austin, you're elevated. I wasn't the one necessarily harping all the time on the whole lack of outside coaches, but that was definitely part of the staleness problem for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That usually, and you just heard Kevin Colbert say it because he talked to the media today, the Steelers' soon-to-be outgoing general manager, but more on exactly what the heck Kevin Colbert's role is or isn't going to be in a little bit on today's show. You just heard him say it. Mike Tomlin makes the coaching hires. It was a criticism that primarily got leveled at Mike Tomlin. Bruce Arians was told to retire. Todd Haley was foisted on Tomlin. If you want to say Dick LeBeau was here and wasn't going to be going anywhere when Tomlin took over, those are the two. Haley, LeBeau, guys more or less that he was told, hey, you're keeping that guy. Everything else is Tomlin's. Well, Mike Tomlin, I would say, answered the, this is stale, where are the big names, why aren't you bringing in people who have new ideas, who are vaunted coaches in their own right? Why are you not trying to create a more experienced, talented coaching staff? I would say he took a big swing and knocked one over the fence, to use a cross-sport analogy. Brian Flores is a big fish. Controversial fish? Maybe, although I didn't hear much in the way of dissent from Steelers Nation on this one. I would argue that it was viewed, this move. One, I think Pony said he thought it was a fake account. Two, I saw people just over the moon, almost wishing Flores had just been brought on as defensive coordinator, although I think there's a very good chance that Brian Flores has a strong hand in that. Ed Bouchette even thinks that this might mean Mike Tomlin hangs up or relents with the coaching on game day, the play calling, and hands it off to Terrell Austin and Brian Flores, or some combination of the two, whatever it might be. Mike Tomlin, though, bottom line, can we call it this? I mean, he hired the single best guy out there to be an assistant coach, to be a position coach. If you actually think about it, a guy who should be a head coach still in the NFL to this day, because his only non-winning season in 3 years in Miami was a year where it's very possible his owner was trying to pay him a bounty for each loss. He is the single best assistant coach in football right now, right? Like maybe you want to argue there's an offensive or defensive coordinator out there who you think is going to be a better head coach and soon than Brian Flores. Okay, fine. If you get down to the ranks, though, of positional coaches, there's nobody better. Senior defensive assistant sort of necessarily muddies the waters as to what his exact duties are going to be. I would imagine you could just easily write in there, he'll be a high-level defensive consultant whose name is going to be prominently featured next to this defense all year, along with Austin's and along with Tomlin's. He's the best position coach in football. Instantly. And Mike Tomlin's staff instantly goes through and gets a huge facelift and an upgrade because of Brian Flores' presence. I like being wrong. When I am critical of this team, when I am critical of this franchise, or really any franchise in town, I like being wrong. I like when those tweets I send out sometimes get occasionally pulled back around and I get dunked on. I do. You know why? Because if I'm wrong when I'm being positive or being negative about a team, it means they did something well. I did not see this coming. Like I said, I think Pony said it best on Twitter. He thought it was at first from a fake account. Donnie Football's the guy that texted us, and I had to click through the tweet to vet it to make sure I saw a little blue check mark next to the Steelers' name. That's how surprising it was. Like all great moves, I think, it came out of nowhere. Nobody knew it was happening. I didn't hear a single peep, and Didi Kinkabwala in about 2 hours to tell us if she heard differently, if there were rumblings of this. I did not hear a single peep that Brian Flores was being considered for anything with the Steelers. But now he's here, and now Mike Tomlin instantly, I think, has, if you buy that Mike Tomlin is a very good defensive coach, and I do. Tactically, I think he's very good. One of the best. If you buy that he's really good in that department, and you buy that Brian Flores is so good he should be a head coach because he's probably a top 15 guy who back-to-back years had winning seasons, even though I don't think he had his guy at quarterback for either of them in Tua. If you buy that he's a great coach, and you think Terrell Austin's a pretty darn good coach, even though he didn't have great results as a defensive coordinator, then they have the best defensive brain trust in the league. The Pittsburgh Steelers made one of the most encouraging moves they've made in a long time when they brought Brian Flores on. And the fact they didn't give a crap that he still has a lawsuit going against the NFL or that in some corners they're going to be under the microscope, I love it. You know why? Because at the bottom line, end of the day, they added a great coach. Not a good coach, a great coach for what he's going to be asked to do. He's a Belichick tree guy. We always ask, oh, where's the Belichick-style tree? They just poached one of Belichick's guys. A guy who was quite good in Miami given the circumstances as a head coach. That was my first legitimate reaction to this story, was that beyond all of the things that are going to be discussed about it, the fact that he's going to continue to pursue his lawsuit against the NFL, the fact that it's going to make the Steelers, they're going to be under a microscope to some degree with this. The fact that, like, it's just going to dominate the heavens. I saw Stephen A. Smith talking about it. There's going to be little offshoot things that don't have to do with football. Beyond all of that, for a franchise where we have been begging, I think collectively and en masse, for them to infuse something into their coaching staff, because you can't just, the other way you can make a team better besides getting more good players is to get more good coaches. Mike Munchak would be Exhibit A, as much as I hate to admit it, because Pony talks about it endlessly. He was Exhibit A in that department. He made good linemen, got great with him. Average linemen turned good. And a guy who wasn't even a lineman turned into an average to above average player in Villanueva. After adding great players to your roster and tons of talent, see like Joe Burrow, for example, in Cincy, the best way to make a team better is to add great coaching minds. And Flores is that. He is dramatically overqualified for his role with the Steelers. Even if that role ascends to, like, quietly the de facto defensive coordinator and that there is a sort of three-man brain trust, he's still overqualified for that role. He's proven that he is. It makes their staff a ton better. It shows that they are, in fact, not unwilling. They are not just loath to this idea of looking outside their organization. And it shows that Mike Tomlin, I think, is willing to bring in somebody whose accomplishments or whose, sort of reputation around the league is very high end. That was the other complaint about these coaches that they would always get. Who are these guys? Why does anybody want them? Do they get hired anywhere else? That's what, because of their relative lack of success with coaching tree guys, that's why you'd get these long-winded dissertations about how does so-and-so know Mike Tomlin? How far do they go back? Do they have any kind of coaching history 15, 20 years ago that Mike Tomlin might be calling upon? Not with Brian Flores. You don't have to do any of that. They just hired a damn good coach. I would go so far as to say it is the single most encouraging thing. You're going to laugh at this. This is the single most encouraging thing I think this franchise has done since, I wouldn't say hiring Munchak. I'm trying to think of a draft pick I really like. Since maybe drafting TJ Watt. I mean, just on paper, what he should bring. It's like the best thing they've done in years. Think of how unhappy I've been. If you've listened to this show, you know. We spent an entire show last week with Pony incredulous that I said that the salary cap money that went into paying Ben and Juju would have been better spent just them eating it and those guys being gone. It wasn't worth $20 million. Think of how down I've been on them. This is one of the best things they've done in a long time, and probably the best thing in terms of what I think it's going to do for them since they drafted T.J. Watt. And even then, I don't even think T.J. Watt, I assumed, would ascend to best or one of 2 or 3 best defensive players in the league status. That's how good it is. And the fact, here's the other thing, the fact that Brian Flores is a linebackers coach next to being a senior defensive assistant tells me that the Steelers are getting very serious about trying to salvage their most recent and biggest draft bust, and that's Devin Bush, who was slandered by Donnie Football in a pre-show video, which you'll have to check out at Chris Muller PGH. Just crushed by Donnie Football. They are taking a guy who was wrongly, in my opinion, cast adrift by the NFL, specifically by the Miami Dolphins, and they are seizing on somebody else's stupid mistake, and they have made it their big addition. They've got to have a draft, and I don't like what they are on the offensive side of the ball as far as the coaching staff, but the fact that they have beefed up and loaded up on defense with big old brains running the show, I like that a lot. Make no mistake, for me, this is the Steelers showing that they aren't just a sort of one-trick pony. This is also the Steelers, I think. This is Mike Tomlin. Obviously, it's Art Rooney, too, because he has to sign off on anything like this. I think it's Mike Tomlin tacitly acknowledging, like, hey, you know, what we've done hasn't been awesome. Hasn't been sunshine and roses lately. You'll hear a lot from Kevin Colbert today because obviously he spoke. And he had a lot to say about Flores. You just heard it right there. About quarterbacks, a lot of other stuff. But he talked about how 9-7, he did pull that little, I'll cite the fact that we still made the playoffs as like sort of a good thing. But he did more strongly than maybe you'd normally hear him say, that's still not good enough. We got bounced in the first round. Yes, we made it, but we were a pretty inconsistent team. This hire by Mike Tomlin, jumping on this opportunity, tells me that he understands. He'll be defiant about it to a degree. Anybody with that organization will be. That's just how they are. He can be defiant a little bit about what they are or what they aren't on the field, but this shows me that he knows quietly that they need an infusion of something new, and Brian Flores is very much that. Also, this is the other thing I thought of when this hire got made. You know who it actually reminded me of? This is from the Art Rooney perspective of things. Donnie Football, you know, you're a student of history. What owner throughout all of NFL history would you say was most known for brash, big, bold moves that sometimes rub people the wrong way, if you had to answer that question?
Al Davis.
Yeah, exactly. This reminds me, from Art Rooney's perspective, just to break down the other side of this, that isn't just Brian Flores makes their coaching staff a ton better, a ton sharper on the defensive side, and makes them great all the way around there in terms of brain trust. The other part of this, obviously, is the large picture here. Brian Flores gets a couple of interviews after he announces his intention to file a lawsuit, but one's with the Texans, who are basically a clown car. Their owner's a clown. After getting more or less terminated by the Dolphins for no good reason. This is Art Rooney, I think, taking a small page from Al Davis, believe it or not. And, of course, we know the Raiders were a Steelers' nemesis on the field and off. I think Al Davis rankled the Steelers, the Rooney family. Al Davis was an in-your-face guy. Al Davis sued the league. Now, that was about geography. But Al Davis was never afraid to do one thing more than anything else. And this is what I think Art Rooney has done that has made him similar to Al Davis. I've never seen an owner in any sport, honestly. Maybe George Steinbrenner, but I don't know how other baseball owners truly felt about him. I don't think I've ever seen an owner in any sport more willing to piss off the other owners and the league and just shoot them the double birds more than Al Davis. And make no mistake about it. Art Rooney greenlighting Mike Tomlin bringing Brian Flores onto his staff, given the current backdrop of what Brian Flores is pursuing against the league. No one will say it publicly because none of them are stupid enough. Maybe Daniel Snyder, but he's in his own pot of hot water. None of them are dumb enough to say it publicly. I would guarantee you that there are owners around the league who are pissed off that the Steelers hired Brian Flores. Even though you might say paradoxically, well, that weakens his case that he's being discriminated against and that other African-American coaches are being discriminated against. I would argue no. If you look at his record, he should still be a head coach. He's still going to have a case. This doesn't really, to me, connect a lot of dots there with this undercuts Brian Flores' argument. What I think it does is it shows that the Steelers were willing to go very much against the current, because I didn't hear any whispers of Brian Flores getting a defensive coordinator look anywhere. I didn't hear any whispers that he was going to be a position coach anywhere else. It's the Steelers swimming against the current to add somebody that's going to help them. And I guarantee you that has made some of the people who are Art Rooney's peers very mad. So I would give him credit for that because he made the team better with this. I would give Mike Tomlin credit for that because he's going to get asked about it. Kevin Colbert just did. And I love the fact that Kevin Colbert pretty much said he's a damn good defensive coach, Brian Flores. He's got a scouting background too. We're thrilled with what he can bring. I am too. I think this is one of the better weekends the Steelers have had in a very long time. It's not every day you can add somebody who, what would you slot him in as? Would you say Flores is a top half of the NFL head coach? I would. 10-6, 9-8, big winning streak after the Dolphins started out like dead team walking this year. The only year they didn't win under him. It's pretty obvious that Stephen Ross wanted them to lose. It was like a Rachel Phelps major league situation, except they were tanking for a draft pick. Anytime you can add a guy that is by rights probably top 15, top half at the very least, so top 16 in the NFL as a head coach, and you can get him on your staff as a position coach regardless of what the long-term future is, that's a dub. Large dub.